everybody, and welcome to my Choose Your Class Guide series for Throne and Liberty. I've already done, I do these guides all the time for the different games that I play to help you choose the correct class to play in that particular MMO. Today we're covering Throne and Liberty, and there are a lot of class options to choose from because classes are very difficult to kind of approach in this game. It's a unique way of doing it. Each class is distinguished by which two weapons you choose to wield in the game. So if you're wielding a bow staff, that will be a different class than a bow dagger, for example. Okay, so we'll talk about each class independently. But first, how do you go about choosing your class in this game? Firstly, Throne and Liberty is denoted by the Holy Trinity, okay? And in MMOs, that means healer, tank, and DPS. Okay, so the first thing you need to decide as a player is, do you want to be a healer, a tank, or a DPS? Okay, because that's going to tell you, that's going to help you narrow down which of the classes that you actually want to play. For example, if you want to play a healer, then you know that your first weapon needs to be a wand. Okay, because the wand is basically the only weapon in the game that allows you to start healing. Okay, and there are a couple weapons that you can pair with the wand that are typically really good with that, and we'll kind of get into that later. But you need to pick whether you want to be a tank, healer, or DPS first, and then you move on, and you need to look at each weapon in the game and decide which weapon interests you the most. Okay, I'm going to go through each individual weapon in the game and kind of explain the playstyle on that weapon and where in PvP you're probably going to be using that weapon. And the reason I say PvP is because the end game of Throne and Liberty is very, very focused around large-scale PvP. But don't be concerned if you've never PvP'd before. It's a great game for just jumping in and just doing PvP with your friends or people you've never met before. It's not a crazy high skill floor. It's really, really easy to jump into and start PvPing with a guild or start PvPing with a community right out of the gate. So don't be intimidated if you've never PvP'd before. I would say that just about every single class in the game is really good in PvE. There's almost no weapon combination in the entire game that is particularly bad in PvE in any way. I don't have any weapon combinations that join me in dungeon groups and I'm like, oh no, we're totally screwed because they're playing Inquisitor or whatever. Okay, it's just not a thing. All right, so everything will be really solid in PvE. I'll try to make standout points where certain weapons are going to be stronger in PvE than others because of AoE, but overall, I'm very deliberately going to stay away from meta talk in general. The meta in Throne and Liberty shifts very commonly, basically patch to patch. So I wouldn't recommend taking advice from any content creator or player in the game that is telling you, don't play that, it's bad, or don't play this weapon, it's bad, or don't play that weapon combination, it's bad. Any weapon combination in the game is absolutely useful in PvP and has a role to play in the game. They are all super usable in PvE as well, so you don't really need to worry about that. You should be able to access all content in the game, and it's very, very important that you play the class and the weapon combination that you find the most fun, because if you are not having fun, you will not continue playing the game. And by the time you get the gear to actually be relevant on those weapon combinations, the meta will probably have already shifted anyway, so you have no way of knowing what's going to be meta next week, next month, okay? Well, once you have your gear together. So based on this guide, just pick the ones that look the coolest. The first thing you need to do, again, healer, tank, or DPS. Then you're going to choose the first weapon in your weapon loadout. Like I said, if you're going to be a healer, that job is already done for you. You're going to play wand. Okay, you're going to play wand, and that's just kind of how it's going to go. But I will go through each weapon in the game. First, we'll go through a little bit more of the tank weapons. And talk about a little bit of what those are like. The first weapon that we're going to talk about is the sword and shield. The SnS, as people call it, is the pretty much staple tank weapon in the game. Basically, you are running around with a lot of CC, and it gives you a tremendous amount of durability with the various skills on that class. Okay, so you're going to be running around in the thick of it with everybody, basically just putting your head against the wall. And even if you pair the sword and shield with, say, a DPS weapon like a crossbow, you're still going to have that tanky feature of the sword and shield, but you're going to be coupling with the upfront close damage and the AoE of the crossbow spin. So like a lot of players like to choose SnS as their first or second weapon combination because it makes them more tanky. Regardless, if you really want to play tank, sword and shield should probably be your first go-to weapon choice in the game because that is going to be the tankiest weapon in the game. Another weapon that a lot of people find really, really tanky is Greatsword. Honestly, Greatsword can be a little bit misleading though, okay? Because Greatsword can be played as a DPS weapon, or it can be played as a tank weapon, okay? If you pair Greatsword with SnS, it's basically going to give you a little bit more damage, but we'll talk about that later when we talk about the different weapon combinations that you can go into. But if you play Greatsword with a dagger, you're basically all damage, no tank, and you have the highest single target damage in the game. Greatsword has the highest single target damage in the game, like I just said, but again, typically it's thought of as you pair it kind of with a frontline weapon because it's a very melee focused weapon. There's a lot of CC packed into the kit as well, and then there's a decent amount of sustain as well that kind of goes into the Greatsword's kit. So a lot of people like to use that as one of their tank weapons, but don't rely on it. If you're running a DPS weapon next to a Greatsword, you're not going to feel very tanky. If you really want to feel tanky, again, you're looking at the sword and shield as your primary weapon option. Another tanky weapon option, or a bruiser weapon option as we like to call it, so if you want to tank but also still be able to do DPS and you don't want to run a Greatsword, another great option is going to be the Spear. The Spear is the most recent weapon released in Throne and Liberty, and is also one of the highest versatile weapons in the entire game. Lots of mobility, really solid AoE, excellent damage on squishy targets. You really can't go wrong with the Spear. It also has a lot of sustain on the Spear as well, so you've got a lot of frontline sustain in there as well. But again, if you pair the Spear with a Greatsword, you're gonna feel a little bit squishy on the side of it, because again, that's two a little bit more damage focused weapons. You will have some tankiness in there with something like a Spear and a Greatsword together, but you're still going to be tankier with a Spear and an SnS. So again, we go back to the sword and shield if you really just want to be a die-hard tank. However, if you want to be more of a bruiser and you actually want to deal some damage, because tanks in Throne of Liberty, generally speaking, don't do much, if at all, damage, but any damage, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But if you want to be doing a little bit of damage, Spear and Greatsword are kind of good options to kind of mix in with your tank items, or maybe they interest you there. You can throw the Spear like a javelin, which looks really cool. It's got a decent amount of range on it. It's got the AoE. You can't really go wrong, where Greatsword is more of like, I'm going to lock down one single target at a time and blow them up. Spear can lock down multiple targets at a time, mainly because it has slightly more AoE. It also offers you a little bit more range, but less overall CC than the Greatsword would offer you on the other side. Okay, so we talked about wands. We'll talk about wands very quickly. Wand is you're picking this if you want to be a healer. Alternatively, if you want to be a tank, all right, and a healer, the tankiest class in the game is usually considered to be SnS Wand, because you get the super tanky stats from the sword and shield, and then you also can re-heal yourself every time you get low. So if your fantasy in large scale PvP is watching people get you really low on health, and you get low, they're gonna get you, and you're like, no, you're not. Then you just heal yourself back to full health again, and you keep right on trucking. If that is your fantasy, right, and you don't care about doing any damage for the most part, SnS Wand is probably the class that you want to play. And again, we'll cover that a little bit more, but like, that's really the only iteration of Wand that's going to feel crazy tanky, okay? Because you're going to be almost immortal on sword and shield Wand. For the most part, every single other weapon in the game that you pair with Wand is going to put you in the healer category. Particularly the two healers that people look at the most. The best healer in the game is a bow wand, otherwise known as a seeker. Each weapon combination in the game does have a unique name. In this case, bow wand is considered a seeker. That's considered the best healing setup in the game, mainly because the bow complements the wand in its regenerative capabilities. It does have more healing capabilities on there. So if you don't care about doing damage, you don't want to be a tank, you want to be the healer, the support guy, you want to buff your allies, you want to get heals off, you're probably going to be looking at a bow wand, or a wand and some other weapon of that sort. So Wand is basically what you're going to take if you want to be a healer. That's going to be your first weapon, and then we'll talk about the different things that you can pair with the wand later. But again, most of the time it's bow wand or it's going to be staff wand are usually the two things that people like to go very frequently because they pair with the bow really well. Or SnS Wand. SnS Wand is something you see very frequently as well. If you want to be a DPS class, it is literally every other weapon. You have your cream of the crop. You can play just about anything you want. We'll talk about bow. Bow is a ranged weapon. Okay, we haven't talked about any ranged weapons for the most part yet. Bow is a primarily, pretty much only ranged weapon that is used for probably the largest AoE skills in the game. Most of the time you're going to hear Flash Wave talked about. That is a very common skill that you're going to hear used. Also, you have the best buffs and debuffs in the game as well, coupled with the bow, which makes it an excellent DPS weapon when you pair it with anything else in the game. So bow is just a super great option if you want to stand at range. You're going to get that, well, the standard MMO ranged look like. You're going to feel like a ranger in a lot of cases. You're not going to want to be near your target. So if you're somebody that likes to keep yourself at range and primarily stay at range and your playstyle is at range, you're going to want to pick up the bow. That's definitely what you want to do. There's a lot of AoE, and like I said, buffs and debuffs on the bow that help weaken your opponent for your allies as well. Staff is another primarily ranged DPS weapon. The staff has more overall burst damage than the bow does. It also has a lot of AoE, but its largest AoE skills aren't as large as the bow's largest AoE skills. So like, I would say that overall, in terms of the skills that have area of effect damage, I would say that staff has more AoE, but bow has, well, bow has Flash Wave. And you can see that this is roughly the size of a highway. Boom! It does a lot of damage, and it can be reset and cast again. And so in terms of overall AoE, bow probably ends up losing overall to staff, but because it has Flash Wave, and Flash Wave is such an impactful skill, you're going to hear people talk about the AoE on the bow very frequently. But the staff primarily, again, played from range and has a lot of single target burst damage. You're looking at Focus Fireball. If you want to throw Elementalist, if you want to do your best cosplay of Gandalf for the most part, where you want to use fire skills and ice skills, and you want to hit your opponent with electricity, and like you just want to constantly be a master of the elements, the staff is definitely the DPS weapon that you want to use, especially if you want to try to stay at range and you don't really want to be up close and personal with your opponents. The ranged approach with the staff is definitely the play on this one. Again, the bow has a little bit more support mechanics and definitely has a lot of DPS, but again, you're focused on buffing and debuffing, and then there's some really solid single target damage skills on the bow as well. But again, the staff, the staff is also the weapon in the game that is the tank buster, which is notable. Okay, so if you want to be the guy that kills tanks, bow's not going to do a super great job of killing tanks. Killing squishy, it will do an excellent job killing squishy targets, but killing tanks, maybe not so much. The staff, however, will break blocks on tank classes, and you will basically completely ruin a tank's day altogether. It hurts their ability to heal themselves. It hurts their ability to keep their block up. It hurts basically everything. Your fire skills, your electric skills on the staff are all going to help. You're going to be a frontline buster style elementalist class on the staff. So that's really what the staff is going to be useful for, versus the bow, which is just overall range DPS, which is like kind of a traditional range DPS that you would find in any MMO, but not necessarily a tank buster by any stretch of the imagination. All right, which brings us to the crossbow. Crossbow, another DPS weapon. If you are somebody that loves flanking, you like to be the flanking DPS, you're most potent where they don't see you coming, you want to be closer to that rogue style. Well, we'll get to that with the dagger, but really, crossbows are not, they don't have the range capability of it as the longbow does, okay, as the bow does in Throne and Liberty. You need to be a lot closer to your target, but you are going to do a tremendous amount of heavy damage in close quarters against your target. There is crossbow spin, which people are notable for, which if you love to dive into a bunch of targets and try to get like a big kill feed before dying, crossbow is definitely a great class that you should probably look at. It's also great at kiting. It's an excellent class at basically being a mid-range DPS. Okay, so you're not going to have as much range as a staff. You're not going to have as much range as a bow, but you're not going to be as close as like a melee would, necessarily speaking. And you also have a tremendous amount of potential to kite your opponents. So you're going to be doing a lot of overall damage, and you're going to have a lot of mobility and ability to kite your opponents. If that sounds interesting to you, definitely look at the crossbow. And now that brings us to our last weapon, which I will be honest, this should never be your first choice as a weapon. We're going to talk about the dagger. The dagger is a support weapon, for generally speaking. The dagger is the weapon that you choose when you only really want to play one weapon. If all that really interests you is playing as that elementalist wizard, and all you want to do is cast spells all the time, you just play Staff Dagger. Okay, dagger is just going to enhance the damage and the power of whatever other weapon you have chosen. Okay, and it's going to make you a strong DPS class. All right, so if you only really want to play Greatsword and you just want to one-shot your opponents, Greatsword Dagger is a great option because it's going to amplify your damage on the Greatsword, and you're going to be primarily using those Greatsword skills pretty much all the time. The dagger skills that you're going to be using, notably on the dagger, you can go invisible. It's the only weapon in the game that I'm aware of that offers you invisibility on a weapon setup. There are a few items in the game that will give you invisibility when you get low on health and things like that, but for the most part, the dagger is going to be the only weapon in the game that really allows you to go invisible for extended periods of time, and it allows you to kind of peel yourself a little bit. So if you're a staff player and you're a little worried about self-peel, maybe you don't trust your healer as much, you can go invisible and kind of blink yourself to safety a little bit. The dagger has a fair amount of mobility. The dagger amplifies the damage on the other weapon, and the dagger gives you invisibility as well. So, but it is the second weapon loadout. So if you went through all of those weapons and you found one that you thought was really cool, but you don't really want to pair it with any other one, you just want to use a spear. Right? If all you really want to use is a spear, then you would run Spear Dagger, and you would do a crazy amount of damage and be a DPS spear user. Okay, you would have invisibility. It would help you flank and get in position, as we're going to talk about, right? But that's usually how the dagger is picked up. It's not used as a primary weapon in almost any loadout in the game, so I highly recommend not choosing dagger as your first weapon, but maybe making it an easy choice as your second weapon. Very, very strong DPS weapon. Okay, so those are all the individual weapons. Now let's talk about the weapon pairings that you can look at in Throne and Liberty. On the screen, we will display whether or not the particular loadout is a tank, a DPS, or a healer. In some cases, you will see Bruiser. Bruiser is kind of a tank that also does some DPS. If you are denoted as a tank in Throne and Liberty, it means that you're probably not going to do almost any damage. Okay, you're probably not going to do almost any damage. All right, but if you're a Bruiser, it means that, yeah, you're not going to be invincible. You're going to be killable if a lot of people turn to kill you, but you will be able to pick up some kills. Okay, so that's what we mean by Bruiser in that case. But for the most part, we're going to be sticking with the tank, healer, and DPS roles for this. So let's talk about Crusader. Crusader is sword and shield greatsword. And as we talked about before, Crusader is a frontline tank that does a little bit of damage. You're going to be doing like 1 or 2 stars worth of damage overall. It's not particularly difficult to play. It has some of the highest CC packed into it in the entire game and is considered to be overall basically one of the best tank loadouts in the game, and it has been since Throne and Liberty is released. I know I don't talk a lot about meta talk, but again, these are two of the best weapons in the game if you do just simply want to play tank on your class. Okay, so again, you're just going to have so much CC, you're going to have so much sustain and survivability, you're going to have a lot of frontline pressure if you play Greatsword SNS. Primarily though, again, your focus is going to be on CCing priority targets and basically trying to be an unkillable monster. That being said, you're still going to be reliant on your healer because the Greatsword is going to bring you a little bit of damage, and you're not going to have that wand kind of backing yourself up. You're going to want to make sure that you stay in range of your healers. So you're going to have to make sure on Crusader that you are actually somewhere near a healer so that they can keep you running. But as long as the healer kind of keeps you on your feet, you should be able to tank through most classes in the game, assuming your build is actually really, really solid. But again, this is probably the highest CC setup in the entire game, is to pair the Greatsword with the SNS. The Crusader is absolutely obnoxious in arenas. People do not like getting locked down very frequently like they do here. And again, you are so stellar at locking down priority targets. That's generally going to be your role for your guild. All right, now we're going to talk about Templar. Templar is SNS, a sword and shield and wand. And as I mentioned before, this is the tankiest class in the game, mainly because you have so much heal. You have all of the healing that a wand can give you. on top of the tankiness and CC coupled with the sword and shield. So bros, this is the unkillable monster of Throne and Liberty. This is the class you play if you really want to have like 10, 15, 20 people wailing on you and taking almost no damage, and then you just heal yourself right back up. That's pretty much staple SnS Wand. The problem here in the trade-off is any sort of damage. Now in PvE, you will still be able to do a reasonable amount of damage, but again, for the most part, and again, you can kind of be a pseudo healer. Please don't get me wrong here. The SnS Wand, the Templar absolutely can be kind of a pseudo healer for your party, but for the most part, your wand is going to be used for the healing stats for yourself, not your party members. So they're not really considered as much of a healer as maybe some of the other characteristics in the game, or other classes in the game that you might pair with wand, mainly because you're going to be focused on yourself most of the time. You're going to be denoted as the tank, and you're going to be focused on basically healing yourself and making sure that you are healthy, because making sure that you are taking damage and you are healthy will save health on your allies, and in this way you help everybody. So you have a lot of self-sustain, you're going to use it for yourself, and that's just the way that it goes. So if you want to be the unkillerable monster, this is definitely the class for you. They're also really good at capping objectives as well. The SnS Wand is amazing at trying to play for objectives in Throne and Liberty, and this is what you're going to be doing a lot as a frontline tank. Your job is to take the objective from your opponent. So you're going to be fully itemized to be able to take a beating from as many people as possible while also still trying to secure the objective. If you're somebody that's a team player, you want to play the tank, you want to be there for your team, and you want to lead the charge, it's definitely going to be an SnS Wand. So next up, we have Steelheart, which is the sword and shield with the spear. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but the sword and shield with the spear is really going to come in. You're going to be a frontline tank that also has a fair amount of DPS, so we're going to categorize this as a bruiser more than anything else, because the spear is not going to bring a whole lot of CC like the Greatsword. If you're focused on primarily bringing as much CC to the table as you can, you're probably going to want to play SnS Greatsword, but SnS Spear gives you a lot more damage while still allowing you to be tanky enough to run through and be a frontline threat. So you'll be able to lock down targets with your sword and shield skills, and then be able to throw down a fair amount of damage with the spear skills as well. The spear also offers a fair amount more mobility as well, which is absolutely fantastic and super great for the kit. You're also going to have more AoE overall than SnS Greatsword as well. So again, the spear has its advantages, but it's primarily considered a DPS weapon that is allowed to basically frontline. Okay, the spear also has a little bit of range capability as well, so you should be able to pursue people. If somebody kites really hard, you still can just chuck your javelin at them over and over again, and you should be able to lock them down a fair amount with the sword and shield. It's a great combo, but again, it's not going to be as tanky as a couple of the other options like Templar or Crusader that we had mentioned so far, but it is probably the highest DPS of the three mentioned. Also, you have a lot more self-sustain on the spear than you do with something like a greatsword. The self-sustain on a spear is actually very, very solid. You're not going to be quite as self-sustaining as a wand, but you will, again, you're training a little bit of that, or a lot of that self-sustain that you would see on the wand for the damage that you would see on the spear. But yeah, you're a little bit more self-reliant on that spear as well, which again helps you stay beefy on that front line. All right, this brings us to Raider. This is a sword and shield crossbow, which on the surface, on paper, actually seems like it's a really good class. And the funny thing is, it actually is. You're coupling a really high DPS crossbow in close range with the tankiness of the sword and shield. It actually works really well. You end up being more of a bruiser on the front line. You're not going to be crazy tanky like some of the classes like Templar or Crusader that we had mentioned before, but you still will be able to get in and get your damage down. A lot of crossbow dealers, they go in for a big spin and they get one shot. You know what I mean? So you're just a little bit too squishy. You're not going to have as much of a problem here on Raider. When you bring that sword and shield, I will say that you're going to be a little bit more reliant because you're not running something like a dagger that amplifies the damage from your crossbow. You are going to be reliant on your party buffing you a lot. But assuming that you have good party members, you should be able to get in and get a crazy amount of damage down with that crossbow while also staying alive basically the entire time. You can't do any damage if you're dead. So Raider does a great job of making sure it can get in and get that damage down at close range. And again, you have a lot of mobility on that crossbow. So you're pairing the close range, mid-range mobility of the crossbow with the tankiness and the CC of the sword and shield. It's actually a great combination and an excellent weapon choice if you decide you want to go that loadout. All right, so the next up we have the Warden. This is a sword and shield bow, which is an unlikely pairing. A lot of people like to pair these two together when they want to have a fair amount of tankiness on their bow. Most of the people end up choosing the bow as their first item, and then they feel like they're too tanky, or they don't have enough self-peel, or maybe somebody jumps on you and you want to be like that tank AD carry in League of Legends where they jump on you and you're like, joke's on you, I built full tank. It's not necessarily a bad pairing, but it is unorthodox. Difficult to position correctly because most of your damage is on the bow, which is going to come from range. So you're going to be ranged, basically buffing your allies and debuffing your opponents, but you're also going to have the close single target CC of the sword and shield. What ends up happening is you end up being kind of a backline peeling agent for your guild. So other classes that are playing like bow dagger or staff bow or any of the DPS class, the ranged DPS classes in the game, you basically are going to be firing your damage. No, you won't be doing as much damage as the normal DPS class is standing next to you. However, when somebody comes in to dive your backline, say a flanking assassin with a spear or a spear dagger comes in to dive your backline, you have the hard CC to lock that player down so that everyone else can live. So you end up actually performing a really great role in large scale PvP. You can peel the backline very efficiently because you're already standing there as a bow. You are not going to be playing this class very much as a frontline because that wouldn't make much sense, but rather you'll be playing it kind of as a backline threat. Yes, you'll be putting down some damage with your bow, but primarily you're supporting your allies, and you're spamming your astral vision, which is your R skill, which helps you find enemy players very quickly, and you'll basically be locking them down with your SnS very quickly and allowing your allies to basically kill them. It's very interesting class combination, and if that sounds like a playstyle that's interesting to you, definitely worth looking at. All right, next up we have the Disciple, which is the sword and shield staff, which is again going to fill just about the same role as the bow. You're going to have a lot of ranged DPS overall. You're going to have a lot of single target DPS, but most importantly, you're going to be a great tank buster. No, you won't have a crazy amount of damage yourself, but you will be able to keep those pesky tanks on the enemy front line from healing themselves. So you'll be able to keep them from healing themselves while standing at range, and then anyone that jumps onto your backline, just like we talked about for our last class combination, you'll be able to immediately lock down with hard CC with your sword and shield. So basically you're going to be focused on tank busting on repeat versus the bow. If you pair SnS with a bow, you're going to be a little bit better at killing squishy targets than maybe with the staff. But the staff, again, is going to be primarily used for tank busting and then peeling your backline, just like we discussed previously with the Warden. But if you want to play that elementalist backline, like you want to be Gandalf, but you also want to be able to handle like orcs that would dive into your backline, I don't know, a Helm's Deep crap. You want to handle people that dive in on you, like our tanks that dive into your backline. You want to make tanks a very easy target to kill, and this is something that happens very frequently in Throne of Liberty. You see tanks overextend, they dive the backline very hard. With your staff, you'll be able to keep them from healing, you'll limit their healing, and you'll limit their block chance as well, which makes your backline a lot easier to kill that particular tank. You won't be able to do that as much with a bow. All right, next up we have the Berserker, the last of the sword and shield classes. It is sword and shield dagger, and as you might have guessed based on my earlier description of the dagger, you're basically just going to be amplifying the damage of your sword and shield skills. Seems impractical, but believe it or not, there are certain content creators and players that actually find this an extremely effective frontline class. You can run in, you have enough beefiness to kind of run around as the frontline. You also have the invisibility from the dagger, and then surprisingly, your sword and shield skills actually hit pretty hard when you pair them with the dagger, and I think it catches a lot of people off guard. So the Berserker is definitely an excellent class that you can use in large scale PvP, but you're going to be basically focused on diving a lot of the times and then trying to misdirect your opponents and capitalizing on big CCs while also locking down priority targets, because you're going to have a lot of mobility with the sword and shield and the dagger. You're going to have a crazy amount of mobility to be able to dive on to just about any individual person that you want. You won't be quite as tanky as maybe a Crusader or a Templar, but you will absolutely be able to do some damage. You're not going to do as much damage as an SnS Spear user, but you also have a little bit more peel than the Spear does. So you can absolutely basically rely on your invisibility to get you out of a tight spot and then be able to lock the opponents down from outside of stealth, which is pretty sweet. All right, so now moving away from the sword and shield, we have the Paladin. This is the Greatsword Wand. Now, don't be fooled. Normally, when you think of a Paladin, you think of somebody that can run into the middle of everyone, and you're like Oprah with heal. You're gonna heal, you're gonna heal, all while basically doing a crazy amount of damage. And that is kind of true here, but I don't think that the Paladin can really stand up to the front, stand in the front line in large scale PvP. In 3v3s, absolutely. And in small scale PvP, I do think that the Paladin can basically be a frontline threat with a lot of sustain, basically almost be unkillable while also locking down and having a lot of single target damage. But the problem is, in large scale PvP, you just don't have the tankiness. So ultimately, it doesn't mean that you're not useful. A Paladin is basically going to be running around in the backline, basically running around looking to peel the backline. You'll be able to heal any party member at a moment's notice, or any guild member at a moment's notice with your wand, but you'll also be able to lock down targets and have a lot of single target damage with your greatsword. So you really don't want to be tanking more than 2 or 3 people at a time, because you're probably going to die. You just don't have the tanky stats that a sword and shield might offer you here. However, you do have sustain. So the wand offers you a lot of sustain, but more importantly, it offers your allies sustain as well. It also gives you a lot of single target backline threat, which means that if you get onto their backline, you can also just one-shot or two-shot some of their squishies, which is extremely important. But most of the time, you're going to be peeling your backline as the Spear daggers and the different dagger classes in the game that like to be flanking assassins try to dive in on your backline. You keep them healthy while also locking them down and providing a lot of single target damage. Next up, we have the Gladiator. That's the Greatsword Spear. This is, can we do damage and how? This is a flanking DPS assassin. Okay, a lot of people think that the Gladiator, I'm going to be a frontline. You are not going to be a frontline. You are solely a DPS on this unit composition. Okay, you are not cut out to tank a crazy amount of damage. Now, I will say that for what it's worth, the Spear does offer a lot of sustain. The Greatsword also has some sustain in its kit as well, but a lot of times if you try to dive in and tank too many people, you end up getting blown up before any of that sustain can take effect. So really, you want to focus on locking down individual targets and skirmishing them in the field. In other words, you're most effective where they don't see you coming. In large-scale PvP, you're approaching from the side of the fight. You're not approaching the fight head-on. You're trying to hit their backline from behind, and you are doing a crazy amount of damage to those backline targets that we talked about, like staff users and bow users and things like that. You are the diver in this case, and you will do a tremendous amount of flanking assassin damage on this weapon loadout. So Gladiator, definitely a great weapon loadout if you want to look for something that has a lot of sustain. Is really good in PvE with a lot of damage there, single target damage, but also has a lot of AoE as well, and just can basically serve as that flanking assassin, and you don't necessarily want to take that dagger. All right, next up we have the Outrider, which is the Greatsword Crossbow. Not a traditional weapon combination, but also not one that's going to be particularly bad. You're combining the mid-range DPS potential of a crossbow with the single target lockdown potential of a greatsword. You are immensely good at small scale skirmishes and isolating 1v1 targets. So whenever you're fighting someone in a 1v1, you're almost always going to have an advantage with this particular weapon loadout. Outrider is very, very good at basically kiting itself around. You have a lot of mobility with the crossbow, and you also have, again, that greatsword to lock down and do a crazy amount of single target damage. The crazy thing is, nobody really talks about it, but the crossbow also has a good amount of single target damage. I will say that the downside of this class is that when you dive in often you are overwhelmingly squishy. So your weakness is going to be diving into too many enemies and being AoE'd to death because you have almost no defensive capabilities. Now, the crossbow does not offer you a lot of tanky stats. The greatsword, sure, you do have some tanky like sustain on the greatsword, but for the most part, you're just going to pop like a water balloon if somebody focuses you too hard. But if you're able to isolate your targets correctly, come at the fight from the flank, or even skirmish and small scale PvP, this is a great weapon loadout for you. Do you want to be Aragorn from Lord of the Rings? Then go play a different MMO, but this one's called Ranger Greatsword Bow. And a lot like the SnS bow that we talked about before, Greatsword Bow is going to focus on a lot of its ranged potential. You're basically going to be picking the bow first, and then instead of having to kite when a backline threat hits you, or like when a flanking assassin hits you, instead of having to kite or run away or rely on a healer, you're basically just going to turn around and say, welcome to the Thunderdome, because you're going to lock them down with your greatsword, do a crazy amount of single target damage and blast them immediately, and then go back to ranging with the bow. I will say that you're still going to be extremely squishy, but again, it does offer you that backline peel potential where you're not going to go invisible because you have a dagger. You're not going to have a crazy amount of mobility overall either, because again, the bow does not offer a massive amount of mobility. The greatsword does in some respects, but overall you're basically just going to be standing on the backline, pelting them with range, and then anytime someone dives in onto your backline, you're going to be doing a great job of basically helping peel the other members of your backline, including yourself, with that greatsword CC lockdown potential, as well as you'll contribute a lot more damage. So whereas the bow, sword, and shield combination is going to be a lot more CC overall, and you'll be able to lock down threats, you're much more reliant on other people. Once you're locking someone down with an SnS bow, sure, you can lock them down, but you're going to be relying on your allies to do a lot of damage. In this particular case, you can lock them down and do all of that damage yourself. You're just going to sacrifice some of the tankiness from the SnS. Now let's talk about one that is surprisingly common in the Throne and Liberty community, especially in PvE. We're going to be talking about the Sentinel Greatsword Staff. Very, very powerful in PvE. Really, really high DPS. You have the single target damage from the greatsword, as well as the single target damage. The staff has a lot of single target damage too, but usually you want to stay at range. It's interesting because the Sentinel in this case is very good at 1v1ing opponents. If anybody tries to get away from you or is really slippery, you can blast them with the staff, or if they try to escape with a small amount of HP, you hit them with a focused fireball, you hit them with a quick electrocute, you're good to go. It's also a very good tank buster. As I said, any class using a staff is going to be an excellent tank buster as well. But on the whole, you're not going to be a crazy tanky player in large scale PvP. You're going to be very much so a flanking assassin. In this case, you are labeled as a DPS user. You are not a frontline tank. You are not a bruiser. You don't have that kind of tanky potential on the Sentinel. You will be basically just a flanking assassin, but unlike other flanking assassins, you do not need to dive in on Greatsword Staff. You can just stand back, and if you feel like it's not safe, you can soften up your opponents with range before dashing in with your Greatsword skills and then locking down and landing the final blows. So really good at confirming kills in large-scale PvP, and a great flanking assassin overall. You can also use it for peel on the backline, although that's relatively uncommon. You can basically just stand on your backline and just throw the staff skills on repeat, and as I said before, anytime someone dives in, you lock them down with the greatsword and absolutely blast them. So you can play it in two different ways in large scale PvP. It could be a very successful class. Now let's talk about the Ravager. It is a very strong class. It is a very strong class. The Ravager is the Greatsword Dagger. Okay, so the Greatsword Dagger has the highest single target damage in the entire game. As I've said many times so far in this guide, the dagger is going to amplify that single target damage that is already really good on the Greatsword. So you're going to have in 1v1s and 3v3s and small scale skirmishes, you're going to do a phenomenal job of just locking down targets. You are the nightmare that bow users wake up in a cold sweat about. Okay, if you love killing DPS classes that only want to stand at range and be total losers, this is a great class for you. You're gonna be very, very, very good at that. Also, you will be good at almost nothing else. I'm just kidding. You'll be great at PvE, but again, only really single target damage in PvE. You're not going to have a crazy amount of range potential. The AoE on this class is extremely low. But again, you're trading that out for the single target damage that you're looking for. right? In large-scale PvP, believe it or not, you end up being a flanking assassin. Obviously, you're your DPS. Most of the best Greatsword Dagger users in the game basically run around in their guild's backline, and they're spamming Astral Vision, just like I'm about to here. So basically, you would just hit R like this. You have all of the priority targets feuded, and you're just spamming, looking for priority targets, and the moment that anyone steps in range that can be killed or is trying to kill your backline, you are on them and you one-shot them, and then your DPS go right back to firing at the enemy guild. So like, it's an excellent peel class. It's also an excellent class at basically taking outside skirmishes. So you're not going to be in the main ball engage, like the head-to-head. You're not going to be tanky enough to be in that front line. It's going to be very difficult to dive straight through the fight. But if you can come at the fight from an angle, come at the fight where they don't see you coming, it can be very successful. You just have to basically lock down individual targets one at a time. I've seen Greatsword Daggers actually have some of the highest DPS in a match in some of the best matches, or some of the most professional matches that we've seen at the highest level of play in Throne and Liberty. All right, so let's talk about the Seeker. Okay, Bow, Wand. As we've talked about before, Wand is the healer of Throne and Liberty. So if anything that has a wand is going to be considered a healer, in at least in some respects. Pairing the wand with the bow is, believe it or not, considered the best healing class and healing setup in the entire game. You're going to have the highest amount of buffs, you're going to have the highest amount of debuffs, and the highest amount of healing over any other class combination in the game. So if you only want to be support, then you're going to want to run Longbow Wand, because again, Seeker is just far and away going to be the best. Now, that being said, your trade-off is that you're not going to do any damage, and you can't really queue up as a DPS class for the most part. It just lacks versatility overall. You're the best at one thing, but you're not very good at doing almost anything else for the most part. Now moving on to the Liberator. This is the bow staff combination. The bow staff combination is, obviously, you're comparing two things that are already extremely good. The ranged DPS from the bow and the ranged DPS from the staff. These are definitely two weapons that you would consider putting together if all you want to do is play that ranged damage in Throne and Liberty. You're basically going to be standing at range. The downside of this class is you're basically a victim POV. If anyone looks at you, you are very reliant on other people helping you out. You are a gun, basically. You can pump out damage. You're constantly churning out damage, but the moment that anyone looks at you that has any amount of DPS, you're gonna need healer support. You're gonna need tank support almost immediately. So yes, you output some of the best range DPS in the game and backline DPS in the game, and it's relatively easy to position overall. The skill ceiling gets quite high when you start looking at large scale PvP, and you have to play along. Like, there's no like good place to stand. Your enemies are all over the place. Maybe you don't know where your healer is. It can be a very difficult class to position correctly in that regard, but overall, you're going to have probably some of the best ranged DPS of any weapon combination in Throne of Liberty. Liberator is a very common choice for things like this. Now we're going to talk about the Infiltrator, the Longbow Dagger. Basically, if you only want to play the bow and you love the bow skills, you love throwing flash waves and having a massive AoE, having the buffs and the debuffs and really like pumping range damage, but you also don't want to be as vulnerable as we saw the Seeker, or we just talked about, the Liberator. In the previous segment, you absolutely want to look at like a Longbow Dagger. You're going to be pumping out a crazy amount of range damage. The dagger will help lend much more damage to your bow skills, on top of adding a little bit of backline peel for yourself, so you're not as reliant on a healer basically constantly being around you or a tank peeling you. You can go into stealth. You have more mobility with that dagger on the back side of it. It is not a bad option at all for people. So now we're going to talk about the Scout. That is the Longbow Crossbow. Okay, the Longbow Crossbow is, again, you're mixing the ranged DPS of the Longbow with the mid-range DPS of the Crossbow. The playstyle on the Scout is actually extremely difficult to master, because you're constantly, it's not just that I'm just going to stand at range and pelt them like you might see with a Liberator, or again, like we just talked about with the Infiltrator as well. This is something where you are going to see opportunities where you can go in and get a big spin off with your crossbow, or you can get in a little bit closer and get that crossbow damage down, you're going to have to know when you can get close to get the crossbow damage down and when you can back up and pelt people from range. You really want to soften up your opponents with a lot of the longbow skills or a lot of the bow skills, the AoE on those, and then kind of get close. And then when you see a lot of people take a lot of damage, you can dive in on that crossbow. You have a fair amount of mobility there. You're not going to be as peelable as, say, the Infiltrator would be. Going into stealth is going to peel you a lot better than just the small range dashes the crossbow is going to provide you. However, you're going to have a little bit more mid-range DPS on this crossbow. So the Scout's still a good option in this regard, but a really high skill ceiling. So if you love a playstyle where you're constantly going to be fluttering in and out of combat, and you're always going to be doing a little dance with death on the very edge of the fight, this is definitely a class to look at, because if you play it at the highest possible level, it can do a tremendous amount of damage. All right, let's talk about the Impaler. This is the longbow and the spear. Believe it or not the worst weapon combination to see paired together. It can actually work really well. The spear has the javelin toss that you can constantly throw, so you're ranging people, constantly putting down range DPS with your bow, and then you also have the javelin tosses with the spear as well. You also have a fair amount of self-sustain with the spear as well, and you can dive in and get a lot of single target or even just smaller AoE damage done with that spear at close range. The Impaler is a difficult class to play correctly. Very, very good in PvE. In PvP, especially large-scale PvP, difficult to play correctly because, again, this is a class where you can't just stand at range. In order to get the most out of both of your weapons, you're going to be standing at range, pelting them, trying to soften them up with the longbow, and then at the opportune moment, you're throwing your javelins. Now I see the opportunity to go in. You're going to dash in on your spear because you have a decent amount of mobility with that spear, and you're going to just start blasting down damage, and then you're going to have to try to find a way out after that. And so, like, it's a very difficult class to position correctly, but if you do, you can put off a lot of damage in both melee and range form. All right, and now to one of my very favorite classes in the game, and one of the classes that I've spent a lot of time on, the Invocator. This is the Staff Wand. This is a perfect class if you love having a versatile build in Throne and Liberty. If you want to be able to queue as multiple roles, in this case, you can queue as a healer or a DPS. You can go as staff heavy, or as wand heavy, as support heavy, or as DPS heavy, as you want in this. The name of the game for Invocator is going to be versatility. No, you won't be quite as good of a healer as Seeker would be, right? And you're not going to be quite as good of a DPS as maybe a Staff Dagger, but you will be able to do both roles very well. Do not underestimate the amount of damage Invocator can actually do. It's phenomenal in PvE because it's got its self-sustain. You're not as reliant on your healer in dungeons, and you can also pump out a lot of damage while keeping yourself safe, so very forgiving class in that regard. It also has phenomenal self buffs and ally buffs as well, so in many cases, people consider Invocator the second best healer in the entire game, which you're trading away for being the best healer. On Seeker, you're trading away a little bit more of the allied buffs and then the enemy debuffs and a little bit less healing. But you are getting, again, the versatility of the Invocator. You're getting a lot more damage, so you don't have to run a crazy amount of healing if you don't want to. You can just run swift healing and then basically just run all balls to the wall damage and get it done. So the name of the game is, for Invocator, is versatility. So next up, we have the Eradicator. That is the Spear Staff combination. Once again, a very difficult weapon combination to pull off, but believe it or not, most of this weapon set is going to be played in melee range, despite the fact that your staff is a ranged, primarily a ranged weapon. Usually what you're going to be using the staff for is a self buff for your own damage, and then you're going to be diving in with that spear to do a lot of damage, and the moment that anyone tries to run from you, you simply pelt them with ranged damage from the staff as they run away from you, and you should be able to kill them. The name of the game on this one is Death is the Best CC. You're not going to have a crazy amount of CC outside of what the spear offers you in the kit. So, and also you'll have a freeze on your staff. But for the most part, you're going to be relying on killing people, okay? You're a flanking assassin, plain and simple. You are a DPS, and you are hoping that they don't see you coming. So you want to hit at the opportune moment, dive in where people don't see you coming, and absolutely blast. You are a tank busting class as well, so you're very good at isolating and killing tanks because the staff will prevent them from healing and break their blocks, and then the spear has the follow through damage to make sure that you can kill them. And if a tank tries to, say it's a Crusader with a Greatsword, tries to out damage you, you've got that sustain on the spear to fall back on. You should be able to outduel just about any tank in the game for the most part. The Eradicator is a fantastic class. Now let's talk about Spellblade. This is an extremely common weapon setup for a lot of people because they want to play Gandalf. If you want to play the Elementalist and you really only want to play Staff, you just pair it with a dagger and then you'll just be doing more damage. The great thing about this is that, again, you're a tank buster. You can kill backline squishy threats. You're an Elementalist, so you're constantly casting all your different spells. And then you also have that self-peel from the dagger, which is also fantastic. You can go invisible, and you also have a little bit more mobility than you would with a lot of the other classes in the game that offer that range. Like, you're not going to be able to play, what is it, the bow Liberator, bow staff, no mobility at all. So you've got mobility here, you've got self-peel here. You're also going to do a lot of damage. Your focus fireball is going to hit like a truck, and you can kill tanks, you can kill squishies, you can kill just about anything. You're a great range DPS. The problem is, if anyone gets on top of you and you have blown your stealth, or they lock you down before you can go into stealth, you will die very quickly. You are super squishy, and the class consumes a crazy amount of mana. We talked about mana issues before. Spellblade definitely struggles with a lot of the mana issues if you're just pumping damage all the time, but one of the best backline threats in the game, no question. All right, now let's talk about the Battleweaver. And Battleweaver is a good name for this class because we talked about a little bit of the Scout before, where you're going to be threading in and out of combat. Battleweaver is basically very similar, in my opinion, a slightly stronger version of this. You're going to have a little less AoE. You're not going to have like the flash wave potential that the, what did I just say? The Scout? Yeah. You're not going to have the flash wave, the potential of the Scout and some of the bow buffs with that, but you do have the Staff, and the Staff has excellent attack speed steroids for that crossbow damage. You're going to have the range threat on the Staff that you're going to be able to soften people up from really far away, and then the crossbow, if anybody gets close to you or you see an opportunity, you can dive in and become that mid-range to close range threat on that crossbow while still having all of that dash and mid-range potential that the crossbow has. So you do have a good amount of mobility as the Battleweaver, but this is an extremely difficult class to play and position properly in large-scale PvP. In small-scale PvP, it's a 10 out of 10. It's a very, very good class in 3v3 arenas and small-scale PvP because people just can't lock you down. You have so many small dashes and lots of damage going on and a lot of self-peel in those dashes. And then again, you've got the crossbow spin, you've got the tank busting from the Staff. You really cannot go wrong with it overall. The problem is you're extremely squishy. You are massively squishy, and knowing when to go in and lock and blow up targets and when to stay out and abuse your staff damage is something that's going to have to come with time. You're going to have to practice it for very frequently. Very difficult to position correctly, but an absolute menace when done so. So let's talk about the Voidlance. These are going to be some of the wand classes that we don't see as frequently or aren't as talked about as frequently, but are still very good and excellent options if you want to try to use them. Voidlance is a spear wand. So basically you're going to be a DPS. Okay, this is labeled as a DPS class. The wand is going to act as sustain for you while you dive in with your spear. You're not going to have as much damage as you would as with a spear dagger, but you're sacrificing a little bit of that damage for a little bit more self-sustain on the wand. You also have wand comes packed with some of the best CC in the game in sleep. Okay, so when you talk about pairing a wand with a spear, you're talking about being a backline diver. So you want to try to get a really big sleep, what we call a sleep bomb off on your opponent, and then capitalize on the fact that the spear has enough AoE to hit all of those opponents. The idea is that you drop a really big sleep with your wand, right? Because when a wand tries to dive in Throne and Liberty, normally you consider wand the healing class, but if you're not going to use wand as a healer, you're going to consider it a big ultra CC diver. So when you dive in, you get that big sleep bomb off, you're going to dive in with the spear because spear has some excellent dive potential. You're going to dive right in and you're going to kill everything, because if you don't, they're going to kill you. And that's just how it is. You are on a one-way ticket. You're going to dive in. You're going to blast your booty. You're going to get all of your damage down. And if everybody is not dead or enough people have not died, they're probably just going to turn and kill you. You are going to be extremely squishy on this class, but it can do a great job at bombing, assuming you have enough hit chance to actually hit your opponent. What a fair amount of people, these are our thinkers right here, okay? Fury is Crossbow Wand, and on the surface, you might find a lot of players that give this class a lot of shit. Okay, so a lot of poop. Okay, you're gonna find a lot of people that give this class a lot of poop. Okay, they don't like it very much. However, we talked about in some of our previous iterations, the wand is an excellent dive tool when you talk about trying to land sleeps on your opponents. If you have the right skill loadouts and you have high enough hit chance, you can get a big sleep bomb off, and this is going to allow you to jump in and do your big textbook crossbow spin. It's like, and you have a much lower chance of dying because everyone's asleep. So you basically put everyone to sleep. You dive in, you get your big spin off, and then you're going to die and you're going to respawn and you're going to do it again. This is another one-way ticket kind of class where you're going to dive in. You're not really going to abuse too much. Like, you'll abuse the mobility of the crossbow to kind of get out on the flank of a fight, but you really want to approach it where they don't see you coming. Get that really big sleep down with all your hit chance, and then dive in and get the really big spin down. The kill feed kind of class. But a lot of people, it is feast or famine. So a lot of people don't like it. You're going to find strong opinions on this class, but the Fury can absolutely pump out damage if you play it correctly. So, Wand Dagger, otherwise known as the Darkblighter. These are the people. They don't necessarily want to get massive kill feeds, okay? In PvE, most of your damage is going to be basically setting it up over time. You're going to have damage over time, dot damage, as a lot of people like to say. But still really solid in PvE. It's just going to take a little bit longer to get your damage down, but like, still solid. Don't let anybody tell you it's not. In PvP, it's... can we bomb them and how? This is one of the best, this is the best sleep bombing class in the entire game. You stealth in on the dagger. Okay, and remember, the dagger is a support, basically a support weapon. It only amplifies what the other weapon does. In this case, we're using the wand as a bombing tool. You're gonna be running a lot of hit on this build, on builds with Darkblighter. You walk in with all your hit. You're in stealth. You drop your big sleep. Everyone goes to sleep. You get like a 10-15 man sleep. You can win the entire fight for your guild in a moment's notice with a very, very good wand dagger. So it's an excellent bomb style class. Not very common for people to go because you don't have a crazy amount of damage. You do have damage, but it takes just a little bit too long to get that damage down in large scale PvP. Most of the time, what you're going to end up finding is that you get that sleep down and you're going to be calling out to the other members of your party, big sleep on me, big sleep on me. And then you're going to see all of those other spear users, all those other bomb classes are going to dive in on you and be so thankful that you got that down. And then you're going to see a big kill feed for your guild. So that's really what you're looking for here. If you're not really as worried about getting the kill feed yourself, but you consider yourself like a really big playmaker style of player, you want to be the faker, the playmaker, Dagger Wand is, or Darkblighter is absolutely a class you should be looking at. Okay, let's talk about Cavalier. Spear Crossbow. This is, can we get close and how? Okay, so this is going to have a lot of mobility. This class is going to be relatively difficult to play correctly because you're going to be extremely squishy, but you're also going to have a massive amount of AoE and damage. You're going to have the crossbow spin as well as the crossbow single target damage, coupled with the spear damage on top of it. You're also going to have the self-sustain from the spear will play a little bit of a role, but for the most part, you're pretty much just going to get two-shot if anybody looks at you. So it's a difficult class to position correctly. However, you pump a lot of damage. So again, the trick as a flanking assassin DPS class like this, you want to make sure you're hitting them where they don't see you coming. And if you can succeed on that, and for example, a Cavalier is going to succeed very well in a party with a Darkblighter. If a Darkblighter is there and can get a big sleep down for them, the Cavalier's like, oh yeah, now we're talking. Okay, they're gonna dive in. You're gonna be able to get a lot of damage down basically immediately, because the spear has really good AoE and a lot of DPS involved, and then the crossbow spin's gonna do a lot of damage as well. So again, when you pair this with other classes in the game, it can be one of the highest DPS classes, but it's very difficult to position properly, and playing it on your own in a large scale setting is difficult. In a small scale setting, you're going to have a lot of small dashes and a lot of repositions to make sure that you're in the right spot. Pretty much no one's going to be able to run from you for the most part, because you have so many of the close range dashes with crossbow, and then you have the pursuit from spear and the javelin tosses and things like this. No one will be able to get away from you, and you should have enough damage in small scale like 3v3 and then like island PvP and things like this to really perform at a high level. But large scale PvP is where it gets relatively difficult, but that's where you have to rely on your friends in your party. All right, now to talk about Scorpion. If you are someone who's like a Yasuo main in League of Legends, or you're like a Musa or a Mela in Black Desert Online, or you love to just get really big kill feeds, and most of the time you're just inting, for the most part you're just inting, but you're like a really heavy DPS, this is definitely the class for you, okay? Crossbow Dagger is meant to be a hard diving jihad style class, if you catch my drift. Basically, this class is meant to use its stealth to get in close, and then jump in and spin and do a crazy amount of damage. In small scale skirmishes, it's actually a fantastic DPS class. Super, super crazy good DPS class, mainly because you have all the mobility between the crossbow and the dagger. You have some of the highest mobility in the entire game, but you're also one of the squishiest classes in the game too. So difficult to position correctly, but you output a crazy amount of damage. Crossbow Dagger in PvE is one of the highest DPS and PvE classes in the game that I've found to date, and does a crazy amount of damage at mid-range and melee-ish range in the game. You're not going to be a ranged class like a bow or a staff. You're not going to have that kind of range, but you will have kind of that mid-range capability, a little bit outside of melee range, and then also you have the spins for big AoE, potential massive kill feeds. I have seen as many people as 60 die in a crossbow dagger kill feed in the middle of siege. So you can get some monster feeds off, especially if you pair this with the Darkblighter that we talked about before. With the wand daggers, they get a big sleep off. It's kill time, baby. So you can dive in, got a lot of damage down, but it's an extremely difficult class to play at a high level, mainly because, again, that positioning, you are so squishy on the class, and the positioning is just very difficult to get off. You have to wait for the opportune moment to get in, get all of your damage down, and you're probably not going to get back out. You're probably going to die unless you literally kill everybody, but most of the time you're gonna die, but you're gonna take almost the entire enemy guild with you sometimes. And one of the only classes in the game that's really capable of doing that in a very crisp sense. So Scorpion, a great class for that kind of thing. Very feast or famine though, so be very careful about that. Now, last but certainly not least, we have the Shadowdancer, the spear dagger users. And again, these are people that really just want to use the spear, but then have the dagger amplify what the spear already does well, which is kill everything. Okay, so the dagger is going to give you a lot of cloaked mobility, which makes you an excellent flanking assassin. That's why you're a DPS flanking assassin. You are basically the staple flanking assassin in the game. Absolutely one of the best DPS flankers in the game at basically diving in and blowing up squishy targets. Just make sure your target acquisition is good. You're not going to be doing a crazy amount of damage to tanks necessarily, depending on what your build is, but assuming that you can get in the right position. The AoE that the spear brings, you also have a decent amount of self-sustain as well, which helps you. And then again, all of the damage that you can crank out. And if you don't use your stealth on the way in, you can just stealth on the way out. So if you get into a lot of trouble, you just go into stealth and bug right out of there and then re-engage when you need to. Such a great flanking assassin tool in large scale and small scale PvP. One of the higher DPS classes that you're going to be able to find, and an excellent choice if you're looking to play the spear. Thanks for watching my how to choose your class guide in Throne and Liberty, guys. If you liked the video, remember to give it a like down below and subscribe. There's a lot more Throne and Liberty content in the future. Podcasts, patch note rundowns, reacts, all kinds of more guides. Yeah, stop by on the Twitch channel. See you in the next one.